All right, so I want to talk to you just a little bit about Flannery O'Connor's short story "Good Country People." Uh, Flannery O'Connor's a fun storyteller. That's not to say these are happy stories, because neither one of these is a particularly happy story. Um, but I think there's a lot of humor, particularly in Good Country People, of a dark variety. But she's such a interesting writer, and her character creation I think is so strong, and that's why I placed her along with these lectures on character and characterization. She does such a good job of involving characters that fit in these different classifications that you have really in a short story. Major characters, minor characters, purely agents. You have characters who are dynamic. You have characters who are static. You have characters who are flat. Characters who are round. Um, it's the kind of sort of character development and mix that a lot of times you only see in longer pieces of fiction. Um, really special, and in, and really honest, right? Like even the protagonists in the stories are not necessarily um, what you would universally consider to be good people. And the name of the story, Good Country People, is highly suggestive, right? They're good people, they're country people. So, country carries with it a certain significance. It's a significant and signifying word. Country, as in not urban, so rural. Um, but it carries with it also suggestions of simplicity, uh, both intellectual and moral simplicity, um, and sort of honesty or naivety that's important. And of course, good is this sort of doubly suggestive word. The way it's set up grammatically, these are country people, and are the people good, or are they or are they good at being country people? Right? That is, are they are these people who are good at living the sort of expectation for the lifestyle that's defined as country people? Whether that's genuine or not, but they're good at doing it. Or are they good people who also happen to be country people? And that's the kind of wordplay that you should expect when you read Flannery O'Connor. It's not entirely clear. Um, the introductory material tells you that O'Connor was interested in writing what she called Christian realism. It's set in the South. It's more modern than what we saw with Faulkner, but not a lot, right? So it's set right around the time of the civil rights movement post World War II. Um, so it's a little bit more modern, but it shares a lot of characteristics with Faulkner's South. Um, it is explicitly Christian, particularly in the South. That would be explicitly Protestant, probably either Baptist or um, Presbyterian, maybe Methodist, there in the Deep South, but probably Baptist. And it's pretty interesting to think about the implications for that, right? So these would be what we would consider like conservative, evangelical, Bible Belt type people, which is supposed to bring with it all these ideas of, acceptance and forgiveness and charity and kindness and these sorts of things, which we know don't always play out in real life, even if they're preached, right? And so this is the realism that O'Connor is interested in, right? We're told ugly, stubborn, sinful people take center stage in dramas of violence and redemption. And that's, in fact, what we're going to see. And so we'll be able to see the violence very easy. What we have to look for then is the redemption. They tell you that in the introductory material, a typical Flannery O'Connor story consists at its most vital level of people talking. That, again, is true. It is not exactly Hemingway. You know, when we looked at Hemingway, the brevity and the tightness, the complete lack of exposition by the narrator left everything to what was effectively quick and uncontextualized dialogue, where the meaning was almost entirely in subtext, right? That's not the case here, but it is dialogue heavy, and the great majority of what we really learn about people, we learn through their conversations. So one of the things you look for, that I've asked you to look for, right, in the discussion boards, is the characterization, the use of direct and implied characterization. And it's easy to see a lot of each of these in O'Connor's writing, and sometimes they don't tell us the same thing about a person, because again, part of this realism that she says she's trying to write, the things that we say will oftentimes reveal things about us differently than what other people would say about us, right? That in other words, we're not always honest about ourselves. And so sometimes what you see in O'Connor's story is that what the narrator will tell you about a character might not always be exactly the same as what the character says about themselves or what other characters say about them. You know, and this is a good case if you look at someone like Mrs. Hopewell in Good Country People. What she has to say about her daughter is not always genuine. That it's not always honest, right? She withholds information about her daughter that she finds embarrassing. And so then when Joy Holga, right, speaks or acts, then she reveals things about herself that might be different than what we learned from her mother. And so that's a good example of how that works. The other thing we want to look here, according to the introductory material again, is that she doesn't conclude her stories with simple, unambiguous sense of what has been revealed. In other words, open plots a lot of times, and even when they're not open, the resolution doesn't necessarily teach us a clear and direct moral. They leave us to think, right, and to reflect on what it is that we were supposed to have learned. And so in this way, a lot of times they will give us epiphany. But we have to, more often than not, revisit the story multiple times. Once you understand what the resolution of the story is, to go back and see, well, what kind of clues were there that maybe led to these events? Could they have been avoided? Could somebody have said something differently, done something differently? And in that sort of justification process, which mirrors, by the way, very much the way our own life works, right? Where things will happen and we go, well, why the hell did that happen? And then we go back and go, could I have avoided this situation? Well, let me think. And then you sort of go through, like, what did I say or do that led up to this moment? And then you have this kind of realization of, oh yeah, this thing that maybe seemed arbitrary and unfair, if I go back and sort of really piece it all together, I really laid a path up to that point, and if I had done this differently, I could have avoided the outcome. Right, and so she's very good at recreating those types of scenarios, and really reading the story once isn't enough. You have to go back and reread it, which I don't think is bad at all, because they're such enjoyable stories. But if we look here at Good Country People as just an example of how this works, I want to point out to you, first of all, lots of symbolism in the names, right? We have Miss Hopewell and Freeman are the two last names that we see here. So hope and freedom, right? These are two words that easily be associated with this good Christian country, salt of the earth type people. That this is what Christianity is built on. It's hope, right? And freedom, freedom from sin, freedom from death, freedom from whatever. It also carries with it, of course, in the South, this meaning of freed, right? From not just spiritual bondage, but literal bondage. It's often a name associated with people of color, although the daughters here, Glynis and Caramay, despite having names that are not particularly clear, we do have a redheaded daughter and a blonde. Not meaning that they couldn't be people of color, but if they are, perhaps biracial. It's not entirely clear, but the name is suggestive, right? So what you have is Freeman and Hopewell, and of course the daughter of Mrs. Hopewell, who is Joy. So Joy Hopewell, and then of course in the beautifully ironic name changing, chooses the ugliest name she could think of, which is this made up sort of pseudo Scandinavian Holga, right? Which she chooses just because it has this terrible sound. So, the names carry with them something at least subtly suggestive. The fact that Cara May is only 15 and married and pregnant is a bit shocking to us in our culture now, for sure. But says something to us about this simple Southern country people, right? This particular culture that they're in. And all of these people, after you get the descriptions of them, we're told on 1368, are good country people. Thematically, we get these sort of axiomatic statements by Mrs. Hopewell. So on 1368, she says nothing is perfect. That is a nonsensical, it's not a nonsensical, but it's a statement that doesn't really mean a whole lot, right? Like nothing is perfect. It's both obvious and pointless. So she says nothing is perfect. That is life. Okay, great. Does that mean she's a nihilist? Well, not necessarily, right? It's a sort of acceptance of the fact that everything is broken. Again, a very Christian viewpoint. Everything is broken. Nothing is perfect. But there's a suggestion behind it of redemption, that things can be made perfect, that things can be fixed if they're broken. And so we have in Holga then, of course, the artificial leg. And this, again, sort of prototypical Flannery Connor. How did she lose her leg? It was blown off in a hunting accident when she was a kid. Shot clean off. Not shot and wounded. Not blown clean off. Right? Which, again, it's not funny, but it's funny. Right? And so, here you go. She's broken, but it's not her fault. They broke her. Right? But they fix her. She has the artificial leg. She thinks she's ugly. Everything about her. She hates herself, right? I mean, you can see it. She's so snide. She's so condescending. She's so prideful about her education, which is the one thing that separates her, right? The one thing that she thinks elevates her above her mother and the Freemans and everyone around her is that she has this college education. And it's sort of autobiographical of O'Connor, right? But what value does this education have for her when she's engaged with these good country people? Not a lot, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of value for her at all. It makes her uncomfortable. It makes everyone around her uncomfortable. So that on page 1370, what we have is that discussion by Mrs. Hopewell. It's not really a discussion, but it's the narrator giving us insight into what Mrs. Hopewell thinks of her daughter near the bottom of the page on 1370, and she says, she was brilliant. So this is Mrs. Hopewell thinking about her daughter, right? She was brilliant, but she didn't have a grain of sense. So there's a distinction between being educated and having common sense. These good country people, salt of the earth type folks, they've got all this common sense. Joy gave that up to get education. It seemed to Miss Hopewell that every year she, that is Joy, grew less like other people and more like herself. Well, clearly it's intended to be a criticism by Mrs. Hopewell, but it gives us pause, right? Wait, she less like other people and more like herself? Isn't that a good thing? Isn't it good to be independent and self-possessed and have a strong self-identity? Well, in American tradition, yes, it is. Although it's worth noting that generally they have been qualities most associated positively with men. That's the sense of it, right? She's not very ladylike anymore. She's not very womanly. Not proper. She doesn't have the decorum that she's supposed to have in the South. The politeness, even if it's artificial. She's too critical of other people. Makes people uncomfortable. Too ready to share her own opinions. We're told on 1371, at least from the observation of her mother, Joy didn't like dogs or cats or birds or flowers or nature or nice young men. She looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. She's gone away, right? Is what's happened. It's commentary on the sort of cloistering of Southern culture, that she left and went to university, even if it was a Southern university. And when she came back, she didn't belong. Is that good? Is it bad? From the perspective of her mother, it's bad. From Joy's perspective, it seems to be good, although she's a tremendously cynical person. Probably from most of our perspective, it's good. In general. The really interesting thing to think about is, does it contribute to what happens to her? Ultimately, right, she's taken advantage of by a young man who pretends to be country people. And this is where the sort of ambiguity of the name of the story comes into play, right? He's good country people. He's not good, but he's good at being country, right? And not country like country music. He plays the game. Oh, he's such a pious, simple Bible salesman, which he reveals at the end is a complete load of crap. And he just does it to take advantage of these simple country bumpkins. He uses false names in this particular one. His name is Manly Pointer. Which I laugh at all the time because I'm a juvenile. But it's one of the funniest names that you'll encounter in a serious piece of literature, I think. Clearly, Manly Pointer is supposed to be an innuendo for his penis, and uh, it's just really funny. All the insinuations of him assigning himself that name and then going to sell Bibles. Um, that it is his goal to screw you, right? That is really what he's doing. And he seduces her, which is almost unbelievable. They go on this weird date. She thinks she's seducing him, right? which is which is what it's really the only thing that makes the whole thing tolerable. Because if he is just purely taking advantage of this young woman who in her 30s has never been kissed and has this detachable wooden leg, right? And by the way, and when this was written, these prosthetics were not nearly as aesthetically pleasing as they are now. They didn't really look uh, like a real leg in any sort of way, and so he's taking advantage of. If he's purely taking advantage of her, then this is almost unbearable. But the fact that the whole thing begins with her thinking that she's seducing him, right at the bottom of 1378, she said, "I'm 30 years old. I have a number of degrees." He says, "I don't care. I don't care a thing about what all you done." That's funny, right? Because what she has just told him is about her greatest accomplishment, and he takes it like she's confessing a sin, right? It's as though she said, "I'm 30 years old and I murder puppies," and he says, "I don't care what you've done," right? she, which is funny, and it illustrates how bad she is at this. What a tremendously poor judge of character she is, even though she thinks she's such a good judge of character. And he says, "I just want to know if you love me or if you don't." And she said, "Yes, yes." And he said, "Okay, then prove it," which you think is like, okay, this is what he, for sex, right? And she smiles, and it says she had seduced him without even making up her mind to try. Now that's the narrator giving us insight into her mind, right? That's what she thinks. I seduced him and I didn't even try. This was so easy. Because she thinks he's talking about sex. And she says, "Okay, how?" Trying to play coy. And he says, "Show me where your wooden leg joins on." And it should be a surprise, right? Like that moment there from O'Connor is just a beautiful surprise. That's what he's after. He wants to humiliate her. And from that point on, then, he reveals himself to be this manipulator, and you realize that he has taken advantage of her the way she thought she was taking advantage of him. And on 1380, she says, "You're a Christian. You're a fine Christian. You're just like them all. Say one thing and do another. You're a perfect Christian." And he says, "I don't believe in that crap." And so then you're left to wonder at the end of the story, well, what am I supposed to learn from this? Right, and it's not something that I can tell you. I think that's the beauty of a story like this, is you're supposed to read it and wonder, who am I in the story? Am I Joy Holga Hopewell? Am I Manly Pointer? Am I Mrs. Hopewell? Just naively sort of willing myself not to see the obvious things around me? Am I Mrs. Freeman, who's maybe the great shrewd observer of the story, right? Who, at the end of the story, Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Then she returned her attention to the evil-smelling onion shoot she was lifting from the ground. "Some can't be that simple," she said. "I know I never could." It's like she knows what's up, right? Mrs. Freeman. She watches people go about making their mistakes, take advantage of people, learning. And she's the smart one, right? Not Mrs. Hopewell, not Holga. Mrs. Freeman this whole time with her silly stories about what kind of car her daughter says the man she's going to marry has to have. Um, yeah, it's a great story. I'll let you work it out.